Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be talking about the United Football League's attendance problem. Now, we are halfway through the 2024 United Football League season, and we have now had every single team have at least 2 home games. This is a very big deal as we can now see exactly how the attendance has changed from their first home game to their second home game, and for other teams, their third. Now that we're halfway through the season, we have a good idea of exactly how good or bad the attendance is. And as you can tell by the thumbnail of the video, the attendance has been pretty bad this year. Now we're going to talk about exactly how bad is it, what can be done to fix it, and why it ended up being bad this year. We're going to go over pretty much everything about the attendance and give you a good landscape on what exactly needs to happen for it to improve and how important it really is. Because I've seen a lot of people online kind of devalue the true importance of the attendance. So without further ado, let's get right on into it with the UFL attendance. Now the UFL attendance through this season so far has been a disappointment. But in terms of the hard numbers, what we've seen so far, the Arlington Renegades started out with 14,000 in Week 1, then dipped to 8,400 in Week 3, and then did raise up to 10,283 in Week 5. Now, they were one of the very few teams that saw any sort of improvement after falling down. Now, the Birmingham Stallions, they only went down. Now, they're 12,265 in Week 3, competed with the Alabama A game in Talladega that day. But then their Week 4 game saw a pretty steep, almost 5,000 fan fall. Now, yes, part of that was because of the weather, a bunch of rain, lightning and all that. But overall, it still was a massive decrease. Now, DC Defenders, they were one of the best teams in terms of actually seeing growth. They went from 15,000 in Week 2 to 16,000 in Week 5. Now, the Week 5 game was against their big rival in the St. Louis Battlehawks. But hitting a 1,000 increase is a pretty big deal, especially because that is the single highest game that was not a Battlehawks game. Now, the Houston Roughnecks have done nothing but fall. They started off with a 9,100 opener, dropped to 7,100 in Week 4, and then dropped all the way to 6,285 in Week 5. That is numbers that are basically on par with the Vegas Vipers of the XFL last year, which we'll get to in a second, which essentially means really, really bad numbers. Yes, the Roughnecks were the Gamblers last year who didn't play in Houston, and they're in a new stadium in Rice Stadium instead of TECU Stadium, but their attendance has been the biggest disappointment of the league by a country mile. Now, the Memphis Showboats have also technically gone down. We don't have official numbers for the USFL teams, but from everything we've heard from Daryl Johnston and from sources, the attendance starting at 87,91 was already a big disappointment and already falling down compared to what they had last year. And then in Week 5, they only hit 7,600. Again, there was another issue of rain, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the Birmingham game, and the fact that it was another 1,000 fan increase or decrease is a pretty bad sign. The Michigan Panthers have also done nothing but go down. Now, they started at 9,400, then went to 7,500, then they finished at about 7,000 in Week 3. Now, there's hope that they will see some improvement in their next home game, but once again, the Panthers continuously went down in a pretty steep decline, a very bad sign, as that 6,900 was the worst until this past week with the Roughnecks. Now, the San Antonio Brahmas have been one of the more successful teams, but even then, they have still done nothing but go down. Their 13,000 fan opener was solid, but then in Week 3, they hit 11,790, which was less than any game they had last year, and then in Week 4, they went down just about 500 more to 11,251. And then coming in as the most successful team, for no surprise, in Week 2, the St. Louis Battlehawks hit 40,317. That is a ultra-modern spring football record. That it even breaks the record the Battlehawks broke last year. So that was a massive, massive surprise and a really good sign. But in Week 4, we saw a pretty steep decline once again, going to 3,757 fans. There was a St. Louis Cardinals game going on at the exact same time that did have over 40,000 people in attendance, but this was still, again, another big decrease. So yes, while a couple of these games have legitimate reasons to have the attendance go down, as a whole, the attendance is still down. Even games that shouldn't have had a reason or didn't have a reason to have bad attendance still did. Take Arlington's 14,000 fans. That was really solid, but compared to the XFL numbers. Yes, the 14,000 was great. It was the only really great number we've seen. It did beat out any Renegades game last year. But the 8,400, the 10,200 for the Renegades, both of them are worse than any game the Renegades had last year. DC, their first 15,000 game was a really solid number because, again, it did do better than multiple games DC had last year, and so did the 16,000. That's why DC is one of the two franchises that has so far been successful. Now, the reason I don't say the Brahmas have been necessarily successful is because they're still down compared to what they've done last year. Their season opener was about midway compared to what they had last year, but their Week 3 and Week 4 games both were technically less than any game they had in 2023. This is despite the fact that last year the Brahmas were a very, very bad team. The Brahmas this year have been basically a top 4 team ever since Week 1. Yet despite that, the attendance hasn't shown improvement. There is hope that they'll show improvement in their next home game, but at this point, it's still a massive disappointment. Now, St. Louis is good and bad. The good was the 40K, the bad was the 31K, because their second home game so far was worse than any game they had last year, which again is despite the fact that the Battlehawks team this year is even better than the Battlehawks were last year. Now, in terms of the Houston Roughnecks, again, who technically were the Gamblers and are now playing in a different stadium, they have still yet to even reach the lowest point the Roughnecks had all of last season, which is Week 9 with their 10,967 mark. So that is a very bad sign for the Roughnecks themselves. Now, when you look at the other teams that aren't in the UFL that the XFL, had, the Vegas Vipers, Seattle Sea Dragons, and Orlando Guardians, yes, a lot of the teams, especially the USL teams, are still doing better than the Vegas Vipers. They all are, but that's because the Vipers were a terrible draw. The Seattle Sea Dragons, had all the issues of terrible planning on scheduling and all that. And even with that, Seattle still is just way better on overall attendance than almost every USFL team, with the only one really being the Stallions, who had their one good season opener. And then the Orlando Guardians, very similar. Despite them never really hitting any massive mark after Week 2, they were still able to consistently be above 7,000, which even the Panthers haven't been able to do. So when you look at this, you can see the attendance is a big issue. And now we don't have official numbers, but a lot of estimates show that the Memphis Showboats Week 1 game, or their season opener Week 1 last year, had a very substantial crowd that just kept going down, and so far this season it hasn't really gotten better. Now, in terms of the Michigan Panthers, at least from what we've heard from Mike Mitchell and other people, it actually does seem that the Michigan Panthers technically have improved their attendance from last year, as reports suggest that their season opener only had about 7,500 people last year, and if that is true, then that does show that there technically was some improvement. Now, it's not great improvement, but apparently even with the numbers going down, the Panthers still have better attendance than they did last year, which is a good sign, but it's still a pretty bad number as they still have not hit 10K. And then the Stallions, pretty much from what everybody assumes, is about the same it's always been. So the attendance, when you compare it to the XFL, is pretty clearly down overall. Yes, DC is the only team that is actually, you could say, a success. And I'm talking about comparing it to the attendance last year. At St. Louis, again, you had a really high and a really low. So their third game is going to be a big deal. But DC has overall been able to just stay consistently above that 12,000 mark, which is that low mark that the DC Defenders had in 3 different weeks, with them hitting 12,000 twice and 11,000 once. So if DC is able to get through the whole season, never dipping below 13K, that would be a massive success. But all the other teams have been anywhere from massive disappointments to just kind of disappointing. Even the Battlehawks, like I said, they still have an insane fan base, and yes, we'll see how much the Cardinals game affected them, but at least at this point, the Battlehawks are still a solid number because of the fact you had that 31,000, which again, there is a reason for it, but it's going to be very interesting to see what they do in their next home game. So now we see this, but what does this all mean? What does the attendance really matter? Well, the first thing to talk about is the financial tidbits that we heard from James Larson. Now, James Larson is, really one of the 2 top spring football reporters and all that. And this was some stuff from Sportico that he talked about certain deals that the UFL has. Now, the Army deal is 11 million, or 10 million, 11 million. I've heard both. I'm pretty sure it is 10 million is the overall deal for 1 year. But the important thing here is the telecast deal. People always talk about how important the TV ratings are and how much more important they are than the attendance. Well, if you want to get right on into it in terms of the value, essentially a 30-second ad is booked at about $6,570 on average. And at least through the first 8 weeks, Fox and Disney have $3.7 million of ads booked, which means that they're getting roughly $465,000 per telecast. So what does that mean? What is the point? What does that number actually mean? Well, look at that number compared to the potential stadium income. When you look at a stadium income, let's just say a team has 10,000 average attendance, and their average ticket sale price is $20. Yes, I know, fees, all that kind of stuff, rights that go to the stadium. Pure ticket value, let's just say a team averages 10,000 fans per game at $20 a ticket. That is $200,000 per game, and for a regular season, which is 5 games, that would be $1 million per regular season. Yes, that is not the same as the overall telecast, but at $200,000, you're still getting a pretty substantial amount compared to the $465,000 telecast. You're getting pretty damn close to halfway of that. So at just $20 a ticket for a 10K average, you're talking about a very substantial amount of money. Now take a team like the Battlehawks, for instance. If we were to just lowball their attendance and say they average about $30,000 a game for $15 a ticket, that is $450,000 per game for a $2.25 million regular season. That is almost exactly matching a telecast deal's TV spots. Think about that. So the attendance that a lot of people seem to say is far less important than the TV ratings still does prove to be a big deal. If you're a team like the Battlehawks, and we don't know for sure exactly how much they're averaging, but there's a good shot that the Battlehawks attendance is actually making more money than the average telecast is, which is a very big deal. And now you have the low side of that, though. Let's talk about the bad numbers. What about if you only average 7,500 fans per game at $15 a ticket? Even then, that is still $112,500 per game for a $562,500 regular season. Now, that is nothing really insane, but it still is a big deal. You're still getting about a fourth of a telecast in your home game. And across 8 teams, if all 8 teams were to average that same amount, you're still getting about over $4 million just from attendance by itself. So when you view it like that, you see why the stadium income is such a big deal and why attendance is a massive deal. That's not even talking about the fact that the attendance is also a big deal on the TV screen. People want to watch a pro football league that actually looks professional. That's why the Battlehawks have such a higher attendance or higher TV pull. It's not just because the Battlehawks have this huge following in St. Louis. It's because if you're an average fan and you turn on the game, you're going to see this huge crowd in the stands that are going all out for the Battlehawks. You don't see that with pretty much any other team, with DC being the only one that's really up there, as when they have sellouts, it's wild. But for the most part in the UFL at this point, because of all the lack of attendance, it kind of looks a bit minor league. And that's a big issue for the UFL, and is another reason why the attendance is a big deal. While I do agree the TV ratings matter more than the attendance is something that's right behind the TV in terms of importance, but a lot of people seem to act like it's a far worse and far less important thing overall. But these numbers do show that it does matter. Getting higher ticket sales is a big deal. If you have more people coming to the game, you have more people spending money, in the concessions, you have more people spending money on the stadium as a whole. The more people you have going to a stadium, the better you're going to be able to make a deal in terms of getting a stadium lease. And so all in all, it's a very big deal. But now here we get to the real question. What can be done to improve the attendance? This is a big deal. But to me, there's really 3 main things. I would have said 4, it being, making these special deals, making it, buy a ticket at a certain area, get a medallion or get a shirt. But the UFL has actually done a pretty good job of that in the past few weeks. But there's still 3 main things they need to improve. Now, the first thing is going to be local marketing. This is something that you can actually find talked about by Daryl Johnson in an interview he did. And that is the local marketing was pretty terrible this year. Now, we have seen a couple of good things. We saw the Michigan Panthers put out a little tent at the draft. As you know, the draft was in, Detroit for the NFL, and so there was a little tent there. But overall, as a whole, local marketing has been pretty terrible. People who are from any of the cities, Arlington, D.C., Michigan, or Detroit, Birmingham, or any of them, will all tell you that it's been pretty terrible. Now, a large part of that, and what Daryl Johnson did talk about, was how late the merger process went. The whole merger kind of forced everything to be pushed back even farther than it already was. And as a lot of you know about both the USFL and XFL, they already like to push things back very far. So when you had 2 companies coming together, doing that to a whole nother extent, it made local marketing a very tough thing to do. And so Daryl Johnson basically talked about that. There isn't really, while the attendance is a disappointment, they need to actually have a full year of true local marketing. And that's what they need to do this upcoming season. Instead of just having the hardcore fans know about the league, they need to make the overall city know about it. Make a lot of things happen. The USFL did a pretty decent job of this, and heading into 2023, whether it be having the Showboats players go to a Memphis Grizzlies game, or having, the Michigan Panthers players and all that go to a Detroit Tigers game. They need to do a lot more of that. Build some local community, love and respect with all that. Do things like that to improve the overall. Know that, hey, there's a football team here that plays in the spring. And so that is a very big deal. Local marketing is definitely one of the three biggest things. The second one is the single game ticket sale date. This is one that a lot of people don't really talk about, but this is one of the benefits of having the schedule when they have it. If they keep it as this very early April, late March date, which I think is a very solid date, you're able to kind of get rid of this issue. You see, one of the big issues with the UFL or the XFL last year was the fact that you have a lot of MLS stadiums where, in terms of the hierarchy of when are events planned, the MLS games are naturally of much more importance. So that's a big issue in finding out certain teams, like in Audi Field, right? In terms of finding out when certain teams are able to play. When can the Defenders actually play at home? When do MLS teams play? And so because of that, you saw it with the XFL last year, where the ticket sale date wasn't until January 12th, where tickets were released, despite the fact the season started on February 18th. And we saw that again this year. Tickets didn't go on sale until February 22nd, and a team like Michigan was pushed back even farther, despite the fact the season started in March 30th. And so having single game ticket sales available early is a very big deal. You know exactly when games are. You have access to buy tickets early. You're able to plan far ahead. Compare that to the XFL in 2020. The XFL in 2020 had tickets go on sale in October of 2019 when the season started February 8th in 2020. They gave you more than enough time to buy tickets, plan out, and get everything ready. Now, I'm not saying that the UFL should have their tickets, already in November, because it's going to be pretty hard for them to do that. But if they're able to get the tickets out the same time the XFL was last year and keep the same start date the UFL had this year, you're adding a ton of weeks that you didn't have the last 2 years into your ability to buy tickets. That should also be a massive help in attendance. And so I think that if they're able to do that, and that's another reason why I like the start time of being the last week of March, that first week of April, because you allow ticket sales to come out early compared to what you would normally if you had the season start right after the Super Bowl. There's a big difference from having a month versus 2 months of being able to buy tickets, plan ahead, and know when schedules are, when games are. So because of that, I think that is a very big deal that nobody really talks about is the single game ticket sale date. Now the last one and the most important one is trust with the city. Look, I've seen a lot of people make some really terrible takes online about this. No, you cannot move the Michigan Panthers or the Arlington Renegades after this season because their attendance wasn't 20,000 per game. People seem to think that every team is supposed to just hit what the DC Defenders does, which is, sell basically like over 15,000 fans every game, never lower. For some reason, people seem to think that way. Look, just compare the San Antonio Commanders to the San Antonio Brahmas. The San Antonio Commanders in the AAF average well over 20,000 fans every game. The Brahmas have had one game over 20,000. You know why? A lot of trust was lost with San Antonio when the AAF went under. Think about the 2020 XFL. You had the New York Guardians, the LA Wildcats. They make this triumphant return in 2023. Where are the Wildcats? They're gone. Where are the Guardians? They're in Orlando now. You see what I mean? A big deal is trust with the city. I talked about this in the live stream I did this past weekend, but think about it if you live in Detroit, right? The Red Wings, they've been around since the original 6 hockey era. The Pistons, just the bad boy Pistons alone, you're talking about the 80s, and they've been around longer than that. The Detroit Tigers, over 100 years. The Detroit Lions, a pre-Super Bowl team. Those 4 teams have been in Detroit for at least 50 years each to over 100. Whereas the Michigan Panthers played there 2 years in the 80s and have played there now 2 years in the last couple of years. Of course their attendance isn't going to be sky high because you don't have any trust with the city. You need to prove that these teams are going to last in the city that they say they are. So seeing people say they need to expand immediately, they need to move teams immediately, don't seem to understand that you're not going to fix the issue. If you, let's say, move the Michigan Panthers to San Diego, why should San Diego people go like, yeah, let's go support our team if the Panthers just left where they were? And we've seen that before. The Bandits never even got to play in Tampa Bay before getting moved to Memphis. And again, we've seen this issue with a lot of other teams. So the idea of doing that makes no sense to me. You have to build trust with the city. If, let's say, you keep all 8 of these teams the same way next season, the same stadium or maybe change one due to the stadium getting renovated or something, and you see one of their attendance either go down or stay basically the same despite the team being the same level of competitiveness, then you can talk about potential moving. But basing it off 1 year, again, especially like the Panthers, if reports are to be believed, the attendance is still up from what they had last year. That's despite all the issues with marketing. That's despite all the issues with ticket sales. So despite all those issues, the Panthers' attendance still being up from last year is a good sign. Yes, you'd still like them to hit over 10,000 fans per game, but if there's still improvement, it's improvement. And so the idea that we need to move these teams because they're not hitting, 15,000 makes no sense. Moving teams are just going to make the problem for another city because that other city's not going to care the same way they think. Yes, I've talked about it. With Seattle, a big part of that was the abhorrent scheduling the XFL did for them. But another reason why their attendance wasn't as good as it was in 2020 is because a lot of Seattle Dragons fans became very skeptical of the league and the team because they were gone for a couple years after being this massive draw. When Seattle comes back, some people think it's going to, once again be this 25,000-ish fan per game. I don't know if the attendance is going to be that high. I'd hope it is. But again, when you have all these issues with teams, coming and going, you're not going to actually believe the team's going to last. That's why I'm against expansion for 2025. I think they need to hold off until 2026 to at least show people that, hey, we can make it through 2 full seasons with the same 8 teams in the same 8 cities. No spring football league that, has been a major spring football league has done that. The USFL in the 80s added teams or got rid of teams all 3 years it existed. If this league, the UFL, were to play the whole next season with the same 8 teams they have this year, that would be historic. And that would be a massive deal and make a lot of people build a lot of trust with the league. That's what they need to do. Don't keep moving teams. Keep them the way they are. Now, the last thing to talk about is what exactly should the goal be for 2025. Now, I would say that there's a minimum and maximum goal that are very realistic as a minimum and very realistic as a maximum. I'd say that a minimum goal for the league would be to hit about 10,000 fans per game at $15 a ticket. That would be $150,000 per game and a $750,000 regular season. Almost $1 million for each team's regular season, a very solid amount. Again, that's not something insane, especially if you're able to increase all those buy one, get one free deals, those, if you buy like 4 tickets, get them half price kind of thing, which would lower the ticket price to $15, maybe even a bit less. But if you do that, there is a realistic shot you hit 10,000 average for most teams, if not all. Now, the max goal I would say would be $12,500 at $20 a ticket. This is if you want to keep ticket prices a bit higher for one way or another. But if you're able to pull this off as a maximum goal, this is a really good number. You'd hit $250,000 per game for a $1.25 million regular season. So every single team is getting you $1 million, but all in all, that's going to be $10 million by itself when you have 8 times 1.25. So doing that would give you basically what the Army is giving you this season. So I think that those would be a solid minimum and solid maximum goal. I know some people say a minimum goal would be even more like of an 8,000 average attendance, but I think that hitting that 10K is a big deal. Is when you can say you have a 5-figure number, it's a lot better than hitting, a 4-figure number. I mean, which sounds better, 9,950 or 10,025? 10,025 sounds a lot better, even though it's only about 75 more people. You feel what I'm saying? So because of that, I think that those should be the very minimum and maximum goal. I don't think the league should have some sort of goal of selling tickets for like $30. If you do that, you're going to make attendance worse. And you kind of want there to be good attendance. It's going to help the TV ratings to create that symbiotic relationship. But if they're able to hit 12,000 fans or attendance at $20 a ticket, that'll be a pretty massive success. So that'll do it. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. I upload at least 4 UFL videos a week during the season, as well as 1 short every week. And if you've been here for a while and want to support the channel, think about becoming a community member for as little as 99 cents a month. You get an exclusive non-UFL video every month, as well as exclusive emojis, community posts, and more. And as always, have a great night.